Welcome back to Capitol Review. Elon Musk has announced that he's leaving his role as a top government advisor to President Trump. His goal early on was to cut government waste and reduce the federal workforce. Doge came out at the start of the administration with an aggressive approach. So what will things look like without Elon Musk at the helm? He posted the details on social media, saying that he's thankful for the opportunity to work with the administration. Musk ran the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, that led to massive layoffs across the DMV and tumbled some agencies into chaos, and several lawsuits calling the firings illegal. Joining us now is Dr. Todd Belt, who leads George Washington University's Graduate School's Political Management Program. Dr. Belt, welcome back to Capitol Review.
Great to be with you again. Thanks for having me on.
You know, we're always glad to have you. Your thoughts about Elon Musk stepping away from Doge?
Right. Well, he says he's going to be going back to sleeping in offices and conference rooms and server farms. And he was, strolling the halls of the White House and the West Wing. So really going from the pinnacle to the pit. This is really a tremendous political fall for the world's richest man. And he's now telling us that he's going to pull back not only from Doge, obviously, but from politics in general. He really had a bad experience when he was in Wisconsin, spent $25 million. You might remember he was given $1 million checks to voters and came up short there. So I think he's soured on politics, and he's soured on being a lightning rod for the administration a little bit.
Well, Dr. Belt, supporters say he did what he was supposed to do, while critics say that he's running away to protect his business interests. Does it really depend on who you talk to?
Well, I think if you look at his own metrics, he said he was going to cut $2 trillion, and then he lowered that to $1 trillion. And now we're looking at about $250 billion, but there's a lot of inflation in those numbers, might be closer to 170, most people are saying. And he took a lot of personal attacks for this, right? He was trying to cut the budget to get the deficit under control, so we can, eliminate the national debt. And of course, the biggest part of spending is usually in labor, in business or in government, and that's what he was cutting. And he was throwing a lot of people out of jobs. Close to 250,000 people have either lost their jobs or been told their job is gone, and some of those jobs might be coming back because of the court cases we have. So I think he got really frustrated with the fact that he was attacked for what he had done. He was also frustrated with the fact that the courts were holding up a lot of the things he wanted to do as well.
Do you think Doge can be effective without him?
I doubt it. I think his leadership is really part of the style of management that he has. There are people that he has put in all the different cabinet agencies that are supposed to be there to try to find more places where they can cut waste, fraud, and abuse. But that's what those inspector generals who were all fired by Donald Trump were supposed to be doing anyways. So I don't know that they're going to be that much successful with people working there knowing that Elon Musk does not have Donald Trump's ear and they can't run to him with their proposals.
How do you think Elon Musk will be remembered? What will his story, how will history tell his story?
Well, he's not out of it yet, but if we were writing it now, it would be, in like a lamb and out like, in like a lion and out like a lamb. And he came in, we know the pictures of him with the chainsaw at CPAC and talking about cutting everything and getting the government down to size. But then he realized that there's a lot of people who depend on those programs. They're there for a reason, because the private sector does not provide those services. And a lot of people's jobs depended upon those things, and ultimately he didn't get a lot done. But I wouldn't count him out yet, because there's something about people like Elon Musk. They're risk takers, and they like to be involved in the process. He may not be out in the public again. I think he might have soured on that, but he has 4 huge business interests that depend on government and what government does in terms of regulation, and he's just too invested to not at least be throwing some money into the midterm elections. I think this time next year we'll at least feel some of his presence in terms of the dollars, although we might not be seeing him as much.
Elon Musk, a big part of the Trump agenda. Will this hurt the president's agenda moving forward now that he's stepping away?
Well, one of the things about Donald Trump is he's great at distracting and moving on to the next thing. And I think that he's going to want to put this behind him. I think he'll see this as something that actually contributed to those real sharp declines in his polling approval numbers when we got to those 100 days. He was very upset with that, and I think he's going to move on and really focus on that bill and other things he wants to get done for the country.
Dr. Todd Belt, thank you so very much for joining us.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me on.